Scar having kids in The Lion King 2 doesn't magically remove his queer coding from the first film. It doesn't remove the 1994 reviews calling him a homophobic caricature or the many later ones calling him a gay icon. And it doesn't even matter if you personally saw him as being gay or not to begin with, because queer coding does not mean that this character is explicitly queer. Coding in this context means using cultural signifiers like stereotypes and references to invoke the idea of something. Like Mrs. Danvers in Rebecca fitting the lesbian stereotype at the time of being cold and predatory, so audiences may read her destructive obsession with Rebecca as romantic or perverse. Queer coding was popularized during the Hays Code, when many things were essentially banned from films because they were deemed immoral, including sexual perversion, which queerness was included under. So using things like stereotypes were the primary way to even hint at queerness, and even then, they still had to be punished or presented negatively in the end. There were certain things that Hitchcock was told he specifically could not do with Mrs. Danvers because her book counterpart was essentially too gay. Even after the Hays Code ended, not only had many tropes become commonplace like I talked about before, but more importantly for Disney, the Hays Code was replaced with a new rating system. So many things that were banned under the Hays Code were still omitted from children's and family media for a long time. Obviously, certain things should prevent a G or PG rating, but when it comes to being gay, the first animated PG family film to have an openly gay character was Paranorman in 2012. This was seen as a big risk even at the time. So while queer coding generally was different in the 90s than it was during the Hays Code, many animated family films like Disney continue to use the same conventions they had been since the code. Honestly, there is so much more to this topic than I can cover in a short video. I highly recommend reading Tinkerbells and Evil Queens by Sean Griffin if you want to understand this subject in a lot more depth. But going back to the sequel, as I said before, this kind of coding does not mean that Scar must be narratively queer. Even if it did mean that, bisexuals do exist and many gay men have had wives and children before. It's actually not even explicitly confirmed that these are his biological kids in the film. In fact, we know that Kovu isn't. But most importantly, even if this is how queer coding worked and Scar in this movie looked at the camera and said, "I am a heterosexual lion," it would not suddenly negate any interpretations of the original film that was created to be a standalone and not retroactively interpreted by the sequel written by different people years later. It's totally fine if you want to retroactively interpret the first film through this direct-to-video sequel, or if you want to argue about whether it's canon or not, but nobody has to look at the original film with this one in mind in order to have a complete reading of it. Same goes for the live-action Scar, who is just a completely different character, especially in regard to this aspect of his personality, where there were multiple articles at the time of the film's release discussing how they had removed the queer coding of his character. I'm not going to respond to every single comment on this subject because it's more complicated than short videos can exhaustively explain, but I thought it was important to at least address these common responses I was seeing.